heaven. Courage, brother. Stand your ground! They want blood? Let's show them their own!
A ragtag band of brothers takes on the most powerful empire in history. Among them, not just founding fathers and future presidents, but the unsung heroes of the revolution. Fearless patriots who sacrifice everything in the name of liberty. With the blood of many, we become one nation. Boston is a divided city. Every day, there's a new clash between those who are loyal to the king and others who see the British as the enemy. But today we'll see the first death in America's fight for independence. Loyalist Ebenezer Richardson has been defending his neighbor's shop against a mob of colonial rebels. Now they've turned their anger on him.
Boston is the tinderbox where the American Revolution will get its start. It's there that all the resentments and anger between the British and the colonists is beginning to gather, but it's also there where anger between Americans, those who want to remain loyal to the king and those who want to break free, will finally strike the spark that starts the revolution.
Richardson's bullets strike 11-year-old Christopher Sider.
Get Dr. Warren! Someone please! Quickly get Dr. Warren!
Dr. Joseph Warren may not be a familiar name today, but this unsung hero will do as much to advance the cause of liberty as any founding father.
The American Revolution has thousands of heroes, many of whom we've never heard of. These are everyday people. These are common people that have done unbelievable things.
Joseph Warren is the founding father that nobody's ever heard of, and that's a huge injustice. Without him, there might not have even been a revolution.
Sponges!
Born in Massachusetts and a graduate of Harvard, Warren is the most popular and successful doctor in Boston.
Okay, so listen. You can be all right. Keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. Just breathe. It's too deep. Wipe his mouth, wipe his mouth.
At the age of only 28, he's become a passionate advocate for the rights of the American colonists and a fierce critic of British rule. In spite of Warren's efforts, Christopher Sider dies of his wounds. With his death, the growing hostility between the king and his American subjects reaches fever pitch. But this violent conflict is a recent development. The relationship between Britain and the American colonies has been a relatively happy one since the founding of Jamestown, more than 150 years earlier. American colonies produce tobacco, cotton, and sugar, which are shipped to England for manufacture and then imported back to America for sale. In exchange, British soldiers protect the colonists from hostile natives. But when it comes to ruling, the king basically leaves his American subjects to govern themselves through their colonial legislatures.
The striking thing about the relationship between the American colonies and the British government in England was the loose reign that the British held over the Americans. Americans could live most of their daily lives not even aware of the British government.
But that relationship gets more complicated in 1754 when the French and their Indian allies decide to claim their piece of the North American pie. After 9 years of war, the British and the colonists defeat the French and their allies. But the cost of the conflict is a staggering $22 billion in today's currency. With Britain teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, Parliament decides it's only fair for the colonists to pay their fair share of the war debt. So in 1764, they passed the first law imposing taxes directly on the 2 million colonists and set off a firestorm of protest.
The American colonists felt independent without knowing that they felt independent. And the reins of the British government rested very lightly on them. The problem was going to arise when the British government tried to tighten the reins a little bit, and then the Americans would start screaming because they hadn't felt the reins before. Now all of a sudden they did.
Year after year, Parliament imposes new taxes to pay down the cost of the war. Leaders like John Hancock, John Adams, and Joseph Warren believe that the colonists have the same rights as their fellow countrymen back in England. But instead, they feel exploited by their mother country, with no say about the money being taken from them.
How much do we owe this?
No one senses this more deeply than Dr. Joseph Warren.
How much until enough is enough?
Especially after watching young Christopher Sider become a casualty of the growing conflict. This father of four is willing to risk arrest, imprisonment, even death as he becomes one of America's most vocal agitators.
Who is with me? Who is with me? Who is with me? Stand today, my friends.
He was extremely warm, extremely likable.
Let me hear you.
He was able to cross between political camps even though he was an extremist.
Warren wins the support of Boston's most radical voices, an alliance of local street gangs that call themselves the Sons of Liberty. To royal officials, they look like nothing but traitors and thugs, but these men insist their cause is just.
The Sons of Liberty consider themselves loyal Englishmen. They spoke continuously that all they were doing was defending the rights of freeborn Englishmen. So the Sons of Liberty didn't think of themselves as traitors. They thought themselves as English patriots.
Denounce the crown and its tyranny. Never!
With hostilities in Boston mounting daily, the Sons of Liberty and their supporters lash out at the Crown's tax collectors and customs officials. Boston is at war with itself. A third of its citizens are loyal to the king. Most are neutral, wanting no part of the fight. But a growing number are calling for open rebellion against the crown.
The American Revolution was a war not only between nations, it was a war between neighbors.
The most bitter of the fighting took place not between Americans and British, but between Americans and Americans.
When does a king's reign become tyranny? Now!
As the Sons of Liberty and their supporters become more aggressive, Britain responds by sending 4,000 new troops to Boston. By 1770, 1 in 5 inhabitants of the city is a redcoat. Boston feels like a garrison town. All those redcoats are meant to intimidate the rebels and squash any rebellion. But the new wave of soldiers only infuriates Bostonians, bringing more of them to the patriot cause. To fan the flames of Boston's outrage, the Sons of Liberty stage one of the city's largest funerals for 11-year-old Christopher Sider. Even now, with tempers running hot, most patriots still consider the idea of taking up arms against the mother country unthinkable. But over the next few months, a chain of events will trigger a fresh wave of hostility and violence, bringing the British and the Americans to the brink of open war. 2 weeks after an 11-year-old boy is killed in a standoff between colonists and British officials, soaring tensions in Boston threaten to explode into open violence at the slightest spark. On the cold winter night of March 5th, 1770, an angry mob hurls snowballs at nervous sentries guarding a customs house. Suddenly, there's the blast of a musket. More shots follow. After the last musket is fired, 5 colonists lie dead in what the Sons of Liberty will dub the Boston Massacre.
With the Boston Massacre, tensions escalated dramatically because until this point, it still had been largely a political argument. Now, it's a matter of a show of force. Now, people have died. There is much more at stake than there had been before.
Boston's colonial leaders put the redcoat soldiers on trial for murder. The lawyer defending the soldiers is a surprising choice, John Adams, one of the leading voices of discontent.
These men, loyal servants of the crown.
He thought that it was critical to uphold the rights of the accused as a sacred, traditional British liberty.
It is our duty and our obligation to look out for the mother country.
And also to prove to the mother country that the American people was not one big lynch mob.
Besides seeing their acquittal as a matter of justice, it's hoped it will also calm the friction in Boston.
John Adams made a very plausible argument that the British soldiers who fired in the crowd were firing in self-defense.
Adams also stacks the deck by packing the jury with loyalists. The verdict is handed down.
Your Grace, we find the defendants not guilty.
The verdict enrages many patriots, but it does the trick of pacifying British officials. Parliament even repeals some of their taxes, and America and Britain step back from the brink of an escalating conflict. But British authority continues to collide with colonial protest. In Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island, the British customs ship Gaspé pursues a colonial ship suspected of smuggling. The Gaspé's commander is Lieutenant William Duddingston. His job is to enforce Britain's commerce laws, making him Rhode Island's most detested imperial agent.
We have not gotten what I demand by the time we reach...
William Duddingston is a great object lesson in overreach in law enforcement. He decided to stop just about any ship for any reason. Americans were offended by this, in particular Rhode Islanders.
Before Parliament started levying their slew of new taxes, Rhode Island merchants had been bringing in all sorts of goods duty-free. And Lieutenant Duddingston has made it his personal crusade to stop them. But on this day, he makes a critical mistake. In his zeal to nab another smuggler for the crown, he runs the Gaspé aground off the Rhode Island coast. It'll be 9 hours before the tide comes in and frees the ship. That evening, the news reaches wealthy merchant John Brown, and it makes his blood boil.
He has a fleet of ships. The British are infringing upon his right to trade. Duddingston has made it his crusade to go after Brown, and he's hurting Brown's business. Brown's looking for a little payback.
He knew that high tide wasn't until about 3 in the morning. They had an opportunity to take matters into their own hands and stop the Gaspee from causing any more trouble in Narragansett Bay.
Wreak havoc on everything that this man has. I want to tear his sails, I want to tear his rigging, and if any man gets in your way, toss him overboard as well. To hell with all of them, I say.
Brown leads 65 men in 8 whaleboats on a daring raid.
Who goes there?
The person who pulled the trigger was a young man named Joseph Buckland. He certainly didn't have orders to shoot the commander of a British Navy ship, but he did so on the spur of the moment.
Brown's raiders capture the Gaspee's crew. A Patriot doctor stops Duddingston's bleeding, saving his life. But after evacuating the sailors, Brown torches the ship.
And as the fire reaches the powder magazine, the Gaspee blows up.
It's the closest any colonist has come to an act of open rebellion. The British Parliament demands that Brown and his crew are captured and punished as soon as possible. Rumors reach the colonies that the people responsible for sinking the Gaspee will be tried in England. The colonists are furious.
This is outrageous! They belong and deserve a fair trial here with their peers. They will be found guilty otherwise.
This is a colonial government. We've had self-rule for over 100 years. All of a sudden, you think you can take men away and try them in a foreign country?
In the end, neither Brown nor any of the crew who attacked the Gaspee are caught. But the very idea of trying colonial men back in England adds fuel to the Patriots' fire and inspires them to find new ways to provoke the empire. In 1773, the British pass a new law cutting the price of imported British tea. That's bad news for American tea sellers who are going to take a big hit to their profits. The Patriots seized this as an opportunity for a memorable protest, staging tea parties in Boston, New York, and other harbors.
The Sons of Liberty, the folks behind the Boston Tea Party, realized that they were going to provoke the British government into doing something really harsh. That was precisely the point.